Hi folks, welcome to the Epochs of Lotus Eaters, episode 50, the beginning of the end of Napoleon. I'm joined by Bo, and we are picking up Napoleon's story as he has just arrived back from Russia with, less than a tenth of the army that he went with? The Grand Army is no more, and Napoleon's position in Europe is very, very weak all of a sudden.
And all his allies smell that,
Yes.
of course.
Yes. I mean, everyone can see this was a massive blunder.
Yeah. There's no way to really disguise it from your enemies.
No.
And I said allies there in inverted commas because there's a few people who they're forced against their will to be on Napoleon's side.
Yeah,
and when they see the way the winds are going, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, let's get into it because if he is, it's the winter of 1812 to 1813 that is the disastrous retreat from the Russian steppe. And it's early 1814 that he's forced to abdicate. I hope that's not a spoiler alert for anyone. So that whole period there, for a year and a bit, less than 18 months, it's just like one long fighting retreat in a way.
Yeah, it must be chaos.
It's punctuated by a massive battle, the Battle of Leipzig or Leipzig. I think it's Leipzig, but I say Leipzig anyway. German word, so you forgive me. So it's punctuated by that, the biggest battle. It's they sometimes call it the Battle of the Nations because there's so many men and emperors there, and it is gigantic. It is the biggest battle in Europe before World War One.
Really? Right.
Yeah. So it's a gigantic one, which Napoleon doesn't win, as we know.
I actually don't know anything about the Battle of Leipzig.
All right, cool. Well, we can go into it.
Yeah.
I've got one quote here from Tsar Alexander.
Right.
In December 1812, so Napoleon's buggered off out of Moscow. Alexander was supposed to have said, "What a career Napoleon has ruined."
Well, he's right.
Yeah. Having gained so much glory, he could bestow peace on Europe, but he has not done so. The spell is broken. End quote. Which is very, very true. I mean, it's a great quote because it says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, because like as you say, the sort of like the myth of invincibility is well and truly shattered at this point. And so, Napoleon looks tremendously weak. Everyone who hates Napoleon must be like, right, okay, we can do this. Now is the time. If we're ever going to get an opportunity, this is it.
Yeah, and another thing is that you could the argument was made that Napoleon was still sort of undefeated. It was only his marshals that dropped the ball here and there. Whereas this shows, the Moscow campaign shows that Napoleon himself is fallible. So.
Yeah.
Napoleon is supposed to have said in February 1813, quote, "Only a short time ago I was conqueror of the world, commanding the largest and finest army of modern times. That's all gone now." End quote.
Well, whose fault is that?
Yeah.
Should have just pulled back before the winter came in.
Yeah, because one of the main things, really, I suppose you could say about that whole period between Moscow and the end, the first end, is that even though he's able to raise loads more, hundreds of thousands more, they're all just raw recruits and teenagers. And we've said it many times, but you want quality rather than quantity.
Oh, yes.
And his quality is all dead.
Yeah. He got them killed.
They were all killed or froze to death in Russia.
Yeah.
So it comes up again and again and again that things would have been very different if he'd had his old, not the old guard, because that's a specific thing, but if he'd had his old men, things would have gone very different, probably.
But you got them all killed, Napoleon. Yeah. These amazing soldiers that you'd, ridden to glory across Europe. You got them all killed. You got no sympathy.
Yeah.
this was your ego. It was run wildly out of control and 500,000 of your best all died. What now? Now you deserve what you get.
So he did raise a bunch more men. He raised 140,000 men sort of straight away.
Yeah.
And then another 100,000 odd over the next summer and autumn. So you've still got quite a lot of men, but like I say, their quality is poor. And everyone knows it, at least of all Napoleon himself. He said at the beginning of May 1813, quote, "My eagles are again victorious, but my star is setting," end quote. Because he always talked about his star, the metaphor.
Yeah.
He always talked about that. My star is rising, the brightness of my star, XYZ people around me are rays of my star. So that's what he said.
Isn't it interesting how he carries with him this kind of narrative view of his own life? Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
In a sort of meta way, it's like he draws back and has a second order view of his own career as an actor, an agent on the world stage. I think it's fascinating.
I think lots of people have done that throughout time. I think if and when you get to a point where you're so powerful and rich and influential and all that sort of thing, it might be difficult not to see yourself in that way sometimes.
Yeah, maybe.
Sort of Julius Caesar famously referred to himself in the third person all through his accounts of Gaul, and Caesar did this and went there. And
so in the defense of the Caesar referring to himself in the third person, they were letters that he expected to be read out and wrote.
Yeah, that's slightly unfair for me to say that, but still,
a little
point. You're absolutely right. You pulled me up there. It's fair enough. It was a literary convention rather than his ego out of control.
He knew someone else would be referring to him, and so it made sense.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, there's one very, very tiny example is in the Alan Clark diaries. He just talks about when he was first invited to be a minister, to be in cabinet. He said something like, "It felt like history had always ordained that I would be in cabinet." And he knows, he says it tongue in cheek, he knows it's nonsense.
Yeah,
he said, "I can't help the feeling."
Right, okay.
You can't help it.
Right, okay.
It's like everything I ever did or said ever was all went to this one point where I got to have some power. And that's just being in Thatcher's cabinet one time.
Yeah.
So if you're like a Napoleon type figure, it must be difficult to think on some level, even if you know it's nonsense, somewhere deep down you think, well, I was always meant to do this and be here now.
But even if it's not, I was always meant to, it's still interesting how the way that the events conspire to make you think of yourself as the protagonist of an epic, because that's how it sounds.
Yes,
right. He's the protagonist of an epic tale that's being told, and I guess it's turning into a tragedy at this point. But it's just interesting how he is conscious of this as he's going through the events.
Yeah, like we spoke about in the last one, where Tsar Alexander of Russia thought that it got to the point where he was convinced he was in fact chosen by God. I think he was right, to be honest. In a very literal, direct sense.
Prove him wrong.
Well, God doesn't exist.
But you
let's
can't
start
prove
there.
that. But also, he defeated Napoleon while no one else could.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Someone was smiling upon him.
So did Alexander march his army into Europe then after Napoleon's retreat?
So that's the thing. They never stop chasing them. There's hiatuses and pauses and things, but where the French army, what's left of it, runs from Russia and from Poland, they're just chased all the way through Poland, or the Duchy of Warsaw as it was then, dethroning it. Yeah, it doesn't stop. They just keep going all the way until spring 1814, when the Cossacks are watering their horses in the Seine.
Yeah,
at Montmartre in the middle of Paris.
They literally arrive at Paris.
Yeah. So it never stops.
Right. Okay. So what happens?
Right. Okay. So, I suppose big chunk of time between the Battle of Leipzig, which is the end of October 1813. So we've got sort of that whole 10 months.
Yeah.
And so Napoleon, like I say, raises loads more men. Again, just to mention, there's loads of stuff going on in Spain the whole time. So, but we mentioned that in the previous Epoch. So, but just to remind you that's going on. Everything's sort of slowly collapsing in Spain.
Yeah.
So that's to mention. But so in Central Europe, Eastern and Central Europe, Napoleon and his marshals are trying to fight all sorts of different fighting retreats. And like I say, where their army isn't as big, the Allies now outnumber them usually. Depends on each individual engagement, and the quality isn't great on the French side. So they're doing the best they can with not quite enough. Napoleon in June is supposed to have said this, or when his marshals were telling him, we haven't got quite enough men and things, he's supposed to have said, quote, "If the art of war was only the art of not taking risks, glory would belong to mediocrities. We need a full triumph," end quote. So he's saying to his marshals, get on with it.
Make it happen.
Yeah, do as best you can. And again, his grand strategy, I suppose, was to try and force a big engagement, because he thinks, not unreasonably,
that he can win those.
Yeah. If we just keep getting bitten off piecemeal here and there by the various armies ranged against him, because also now it's not just the Russian armies. It's going
to be the Austrians, the Prussians, probably some Brits.
Yeah, exactly. The Austrians are a bit late to the table because the Emperor of Austria, Francis, is his father-in-law. Yeah,
she's married. Yeah, his niece or daughter is married to Napoleon. Yeah. But still, you can see how the tidal forces would drag him into this coalition. Like, everyone's just like, "Are you serious? This guy's done everything to us, and you're just going to sit there, are you? Like a cuckold?" It's like, okay, fine. Here's 100,000 men.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a great quote. It's a bit later on, but I'd love the quote so much. But right near the end, when Francis does declare war on Napoleon, and when Napoleon is with his wife and son for the last time ever, he says something like, "Don't worry, I shall beat Papa Francis. Don't worry." Okay.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, he's done it before, a couple of times.
Yeah.
But anyway, in July, Metternich, who was the Austrian foreign secretary, but a bit more than that. He's a bit like an early Bismarck. He's like super important. Like he really, really dictates policy, and loads of other people in Europe consider him a master. Slightly after Napoleon's fall, arguably, you can argue it all different ways, the two most powerful people in terms of foreign policy are Metternich and Castlereagh, the British foreign secretary. They sort of, between them, decide all sorts of grand, sweeping things. Anyway, in July, so before the Battle of Leipzig, Metternich was supposed to have said to Napoleon, "Peace and war lie in your Majesty's hands. Today you can still make peace. Tomorrow it may be too late." Because what they did, even before Leipzig, they said, let's have some sort of peace. We don't want a giant battle where hundreds of thousands of guys are going to die.
Yeah.
Can't you just... they give him pretty good terms, really.
Can't you just contain your ego?
Yeah.
And Napoleon's like, no.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have marched 500,000 men into Russia if I could contain my ego, idiot.
Napoleon's like, no way. Well, they give him terms which are a humiliation, but still, looking back at it in hindsight, unbelievably generous. They say you can keep, obviously, your crown.
Yeah.
You can keep all of France. You can keep big chunks of Belgium and Holland, and a few other bits and bobs around like Alsace and stuff. I think some bits of Italy, tiny bits of Italy.
You've still got a French empire, is what they're saying. You've still got territory that isn't French. Stop complaining. And Napoleon's like, that's not enough.
Yeah, Napoleon's like, no thanks. Yeah, he just doesn't consider, even though he knows his star is beginning to set.
Even though it would be a tactically sane thing to do. Even if it was just like, okay, well, in 5 years, I'll see you again. You know, it just, like, how arrogant.
Yeah. I mean, it's, because a bit later, not too long, a few months later, they offer him another deal, and it's just way worse.
Obviously.
Oh yeah, kind of obviously. And so that quote by Metternich there is a sort of, again, a great quote, because it's just so sort of true. It's so on the nose, and it sort of highlights Napoleon's blinkers. He's got blinkers on. If he was completely rational, you would have hoped that he would have taken that deal, at least to buy himself a little bit more time. A particular Russian general, not one of the big ones, but in July 1813, he said, expect a defeat wherever the emperor attacks in person. Attack and defeat his lieutenants wherever you can. So that plays into a thing where they literally realised, all the allied generals realised that Napoleon really is just way better than his marshals. Just a whole different class. Yeah. So they make this conscious decision to, if you ever realise Napoleon is on the field, just whatever your position is, whatever's going on, just retreat from him. You're not going to be reprimanded. No one's going to be annoyed with you at all. And wherever the Napoleon isn't, attack.
I mean, this is exactly Hannibal and Mago and what was the other one? Hasdrubal. Right. You know, wherever Hannibal is, he gets the magic victory. But when his brothers are bringing in the giant army, the Romans attack it and crush it. You know, you can tell when the general, the individual themselves, is the magic formula, the gold dust that's making all of this work. And Napoleon is obviously that. You know, for whatever reason, whatever it happens in his head, he's got the Midas touch when it comes to war. And you get some men like that throughout history. It's like, okay, well then don't fight them. As Fabian was like, well, just don't bother.
Yeah.
That's how he wins. So don't deny him that, and then win everywhere else. So brilliant strategy.
It's a classic thing, like von Clausewitz or Sun Tzu. Lots of different military theorists say, don't fight a fight you can't win, or you think you can't win. Yeah. Only fight ones you think you can win.
Yeah. Don't play to the enemy's strengths. And if the enemy's strengths is massive pitched battles, don't do it.
Must have been very frustrating from Napoleon's point of view, that whatever he does, they just they just run away. Because quite a few times in this sort of summer of 1813, he does like a great manoeuvre, gets people to go across a river and it would have all been great if at the very end of it he had a little engagement or a big engagement that he could win. But he's not allowed that. He's not given
Yeah,
that.
they just deny him. It's very Hannibal-esque here, where it's just like, we're just not going to fight you. It's like, now what? You know.
And the sort of vacuum left behind his armies are just immediately filled by Allied troops and things. So it must be so frustrating for Napoleon. But I mean,
too bad.
Again, well, there's one example where one of the, I think Blucher, because Blucher's involved in all of this, where he doesn't abide by the rule one time and gets his ass handed to him a little bit. And so they're like, okay, we've got this. The rule's a good one. We've got to stick to it hard and fast.
Literally a Varro moment there.
You don't want to. He's better than you.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. Whoever you are, he's better than you.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.